Knesset building in Jerusalem, Israel, National Educational Television and the New York Times presents News in Perspective. Special edition, Prime Minister Golda Meir. In a conversation with Clifton Daniel. Now, Mr. Daniel.
This is my first visit to Israel. When I was in Jerusalem 22 years ago, as a correspondent of the New York Times, the country was called Palestine, and it was governed, somewhat precariously, by the British, under a mandate from the League of Nations. Mrs. Golda Meir was then a major official of the Jewish Agency, which was working with other Zionist organizations to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. They succeeded against the bitter opposition of their Arab neighbors. It took one war to establish the State of Israel and two more to preserve it. Mrs. Meir was one of the founders and pioneers of the Jewish state, the most prominent and influential woman in the country. Now, at the age of 71, she's reached the pinnacle of the career she started as a school teacher in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She is the Prime Minister of Israel. In earlier days, Mrs. Meir and I knew each other. We are renewing the acquaintance here in an anteroom of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, in a dramatic and handsome new building high on a hill in Jerusalem. Mrs. Meir, a few days ago, Israel came of age. She celebrated her 21st birthday. And there was dancing in the streets. Aside from the establishment of the state itself, what has been the greatest achievement of the Zionist movement and of the people of Israel?
Well, to me, probably the greatest achievement is that since the State of Israel was established in 1948, on a Friday afternoon and Saturday morning, a boat reached the port of Tel Aviv, which a week before that would have been called illegal immigrants.
I remember some of them, yes.
They came in that morning. They weren't illegal. They came into the state. And since then, there is no more Jewish refugee in the world. We were always identified as a refugee people. Throughout the years, throughout decades, probably centuries, there were Jews wandering around from one place to another, not always finding an open door, and always presenting a problem to many peoples of the world. Since that day, there's no problem of Jewish refugees.
That was the problem, of course, that the state was created to solve.
Exactly.
As the state enters its 22nd year, has this safe haven, this secure haven for Jews, is it secure? In recent times, there has been heavy shooting and bombing across the borders with Jordan and Egypt. Secretary General Lufant of the United Nations has said that there is a virtual state of war along the Suez Canal. Do you agree with the Secretary General's estimate of the situation, incidentally?
Well, there is, as long as there is shooting, I suppose it is some kind of state of war. It isn't peace, at any rate, and it isn't quiet. But we feel that the state is secure, and are hoping, as we did throughout from the very beginning, that all shooting should cease. Moreover, we believe that the day will come when it will.
Well, the fighting doesn't seem to alarm you, and it doesn't seem to, in your opinion, seriously endanger the security of the state. What about the public reaction? How is the public reacting to the present situation?
The public in Israel?
Public in Israel, yes.
They couldn't be better. I think you saw them on the Day of Independence with thousands of young people in the streets from schools from all over the country. You go through the streets of any city, you go to the villages, the kibbutzim and the moshavim in the valley of the Jordan or the valley of Beit Shan, those that are being very often attacked by the Jordanians from the other side of the border. The shells, sometimes during the day, very often at night. Their children now have been living actually in the air shelters for probably a year and a half. As far as the spirit is concerned, not a single one has budged. The city of Beit Shean, for instance. Some people were leaving Beit Shean throughout the years since it was established. But since the first shelling from the other side, not one single person got up and left Beit Shean.
What about feeling outside? Are immigrants still coming?
There are immigrants coming. As a matter of fact, this will be a pretty good year as far as immigration is concerned.
By pretty good, what are the figures?
I think we'll reach about 40,000 by the end of the year.
And tourists, those people who bring that welcome foreign exchange?
Tourists, well, they don't bring only foreign exchange, which we welcome, that's too. But we welcome the idea that they come. And it's very interesting to see them come. It's interesting, a very good friend of mine that comes here quite often and always travels El Al, told me the other day he had to come by another airline because there was no room for him in El Al.
In general, what is the state of Israel's defenses and of her armaments and manpower as compared with 1967?
Well, I think we are much better situated today than we were then. You cannot, I think you cannot differentiate between or divorce manpower, armaments, and the place where the men stand. And of course, the difference is very evident and extremely important. In 67, just before the war, the latter part of May and the first days of June, and some people forget that, the bombers, Egyptian bombers and planes were about between 3 and 4 minutes from Tel Aviv. Now they're much farther away.
And the Israeli army is considerably nearer Cairo than it was on that day.
Yes, quite.
In comparison...
But the only difference is that the bombers that Nasser brought into the Sinai Desert were brought there in order to attack Tel Aviv. We are near Cairo, and we have no intention nor desire nor ambition to attack Cairo or to attack any other place.
Let's look at the other side for a moment. What do you think of the state of armaments and military capability on the other side of the border, particularly in Egypt?
Well, as far as we know, if we speak about equipment, it has been more than replaced what they have lost during the war. The Soviet Union immediately after the Six-Day War began airlifting all kinds of equipment to Egypt to replace what they have lost, and as far as we know, they have received more than they have lost.
And in relative terms, you still think that Israel is stronger than it was when it faced the Egyptians in 1967?
Yes. There's no doubt about that.
Does this fighting between Israel and her neighbors, in your opinion, if it doesn't seriously endanger Israel at this time, does it endanger world peace?
No. I don't think that we're on the brink of war. What is going on the Suez Canal or the Jordanian border is certainly not peace, and there is shooting. There's fighting there, but certainly we do not feel that real war will break out.
If there were a real war, do you have any concern now that there might be Soviet intervention on the other side, as the Soviet Union is now so strong in the Mediterranean basin?
No, I don't think it will. I don't think the Soviet Union would intervene and take the risk that maybe somebody else may intervene. And we've learned a lesson of the 5th of June. I think the Soviet Union has learned this lesson. I think the world should have taken account of it. that whether the Soviet Union wanted to intervene or not, of course, I do not know. But what is important is that it didn't. And I see no reason why it should want to do it now, if there will be fighting again.
Do you believe that the Soviet Union then is putting a restraining hand on the shoulder of the Arabs or not?
Well, I don't know. The fact that it has again sent such large quantities of arms into Egypt would not show that it is trying to restrain the Arabs, because I'm convinced that the Soviet Union knows beyond any doubt that Israel did not want to attack anybody in the past, nor does it have any desire to do it in the present or in the future. I'm sure that the Soviet Union is convinced of that. Therefore, the sending of arms, of Soviet arms to the Arab countries in our area, especially to Egypt, certainly is not because the Soviet Union has come to the conclusion that they are in danger and therefore need those arms in self-defense. I would say that when the Soviet Union started to be the supplier of arms to Egypt in 1955, it was the so-called Czech deal, but it was actually a deal with the Soviet Union. It was not in order to give Egypt arms for its defense, but I believe that, to my sorrow, the situation is that Arab leaders, when you give them arms, you practically take more or less control of their countries. And arms seems to be an important item to them.
Well, speaking of arms suppliers, are you satisfied at the moment with your sources of supply, particularly the United States of America?
We're very appreciative of what the United States has done and is doing now to give us the minimum that we need. For some things, it is the only supplier now in the world after France has acted as it has. We appreciate that very much. I think our military people have quite a shopping list that they would like to have filled. I hope it will be.
Are you perturbed by the thought that perhaps the big four powers might agree on some sort of an arms embargo for all countries in the Middle East?
I don't know what the four powers can agree on. Or will they come to any agreement, or will they not? And if they should, anybody that speaks of an embargo of arms to the Middle East, and we would be the first ones that would be happy to throw all the hardware into the sea, at any rate, to stop spending one single penny on additional hardware, because there are many other things that we enjoy more spending money on than on tanks or planes or things of this kind. But anybody that speaks of embargo certainly should take many other things in consideration. There must be some balance, a fair balance of power between us and the Arab countries. And it's not between us and one Arab country, between us and all the others in our neighborhood, until the day when there will be real peace. But therefore, just merely saying that from now on, from this moment on, no more shipments into the Middle East does not put all of us on a fair basis.
But before we get to what the four powers may agree on, we certainly want to talk about that. I'd like to ask you if you can tell me what you think is the reason for this recent increase in military activity on the borders that you have described as being, I would say, damaging but not too dangerous. Well, I heard it said here, incidentally, that this is not a military offensive, but a diplomatic one.
Who said that?
I say I've heard it said here in Jerusalem.
I was just going to say, the shells fall in the near our men, but I think it is intended that the sound should be heard somewhere else. Look what has happened. The Arabs were preparing, Egypt primarily, but all the others joined in quickly. At least our neighbor from the other side of the Jordan thought it was a proper thing to do to join in. They were preparing the war between the 15th, 16th of May until the 5th of June. Massed army and tanks and planes and guns and whatnot filled the Sinai Desert with a hope, I suppose, that they can just march through, bomb out the country, and occupy it. And they did not succeed. And we immediately, after the war, said, well, all right, you have tried again for the third time. You have not succeeded. But we didn't say it in a voice of bragging. Anybody can tell you that after such a victory, first victory is that we remained alive. But after this kind of a victory, there was no celebration in the country. There's no dancing in the streets. This was not the mood. The mood was, the war is over. We're alive. Now again, we will ask for peace. And we've been begging for peace from the very first moment, not because we feel that we're so weak, but because we just don't want any more wars. We didn't want them in the first place. Now, instead of the Arab leaders feeling the weight of their sins and of their responsibility, not towards Israel, towards their own people, to give up this spending of money and efforts just for war, for killing and being killed, and try to do something about it. And the only thing they can do is to meet us and come to a peace agreement with us. We have a feeling that the formation of the four just lifted the responsibility off the shoulders of President Nasser and King Hussein, and now they sit back and say, well, somebody's going to take care of it for us, but in order that they do it well and in our favor, just do a little bit of shooting, so that they should really work under the pressure of the possibility of war breaking out any moment.
Do you think that this little bit of shooting has helped or hurt prospects of peace then?
As far as I think that as long as the four powers sit there, there's no reason why the Arab leaders should say, well, we're tired of this. Maybe we should meet the Israelis and try to come to a peace agreement. Why should they?
Well, speaking of peace agreement, as you know, I recently had a talk on television also with President Nasser in Cairo. And he said that the only basis for a settlement of the 1967 war was the Security Council resolution of November 1967. He particularly emphasized that Israel must withdraw from all territories occupied during the war and repatriate or compensate the Palestinian Arabs who've been displaced in the fighting since 1948. First of all, in discussing this, could you tell me, or could you clarify for me, Israel's attitude toward the United Nations resolution?
We said that the United Nations resolution is a basis for a peace agreement, and we saw it as an effort to bring the parties together for a peace agreement. As such, we have accepted it. We have cooperated with Dr. Yaring from the very beginning. It was his duty, according to this agreement, to get in touch with the parties, communicate with the parties, to try to bring about an agreement between the parties. As far as we are concerned, we were in perfect agreement with that task and cooperated with him. And when Dr. Yaring at one moment thought that maybe he could convene a meeting of foreign ministers or of representatives of the government, we immediately said yes, we're willing to come anywhere at any time, but there was no cooperation from the other side.
You don't regard the resolution, however, as an absolute mandate for you to do certain things.
No, first, the resolution was not accepted as a numbers of resolutions, one saying this must be done, and wait until that is done, then something else must be done, and so on. This is, as President Nasser says, the Arab interpretation of the resolution. But everybody else's interpretation is as it was interpreted at that meeting, and that is that all the articles of that resolution are integral parts of one resolution. There is no such thing that you begin first, so Mr. Nasser always likes to say that the first resolution is, or the first article, the first item is that Israel should withdraw from Arab-held territories. He then puts in another word, from all Arab territories. Of course, that little word all is not in the resolution. But that is only part of it. And if Nasser, and as long as Nasser interprets it, that the first thing that must happen is that Israel should withdraw to the borders of the 4th of June. Second thing we should do is open doors wide open and allow all the refugees to come back. Well, after that, he doesn't have to worry anymore.
The war is...
everything will be settled.
You mean from his point of view, the war is...
Yes, he doesn't have to worry about the other items in the resolution. But that wasn't the intention of the resolution, and that it wasn't what was decided.
Well, the stickiest point in the resolution, it seems to me, is that one, calling for, to use the exact words which you just mentioned, calling for the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories of recent conflict. The Arabs, as you say, read that one way, Israel reads it another. I know you don't want to and don't intend to give away your negotiating position, but you have said here in Jerusalem that there are some places that Israel does not intend to give up. What are they?
No, I think when Israel answered this very important and vital question, when government and the Knesset adopted a stand and announced it officially, saying that we want secure, recognized, and agreed borders. Now, agreed does not mean the borders that are agreed on by the Israel cabinet. We sit among ourselves and we agree on borders. We have no discussion in the cabinet on borders. Agreed, that means indirect negotiations between us and the Arab states. After we have said that, I don't think we should be required to say anything more.
Well, you and others, I think, have mentioned several areas. If I may tick them off just one moment. First of all, the Golan Heights in Syria. There are already, I believe, 10 settlements established there, 10 Israeli settlements. In effect, it seems that there is a de facto annexation taking place, or at the very least, Israel has indicated a desire to continue to control that area. Is there any point in talking about that with the Syrians or with anyone else, or is it beyond negotiation?
First, with the Syrians, it's easy. They don't even talk to Dr. Yaring, let alone talking to Israelis. But seriously speaking, I believe that anybody that goes up to the Golan Heights and sees our people down below answers the question himself. As a matter of fact, I have not yet met anybody that has been up in the Golan Heights and that doesn't come down saying to us, of course, this is not a point for discussion at all. For 19 years, our people were working down in the fields in the valley, and the Syrian guns were pointing at them and shelling those villages. Every house, if you've been up to the Golan Heights, you can see every house, every person walking in the yard, like in the palm of your hand. And no wonder that after the fighting was over, the commander of the northern region, being up there, and as soon as the fighting was over, first thing he did was to send a message down below to the people saying that only from these heights do I see how big you are.
Well,
and they were big to sit there for 19 years and not budging. But certainly we're not going to do that again.
Would neutralization or demilitarization serve the same purpose?